Hello, everyone. It's 4 o'clock now, so we're going to get started. Thank you for coming to this Layers of London webinar. And I'm sure most of you will have seen that it's our final webinar. We've been doing this almost every week since we went into lockdown back in March or April. And we've been really grateful for all the enthusiasm. I know some of you here have been to a lot of our sessions, so I really want to thank everyone for the enthusiasm, and thank you for coming along today. And if it's your first time, it should be a good one. We're coming to the end of our current funding period at the end of this month, so some of us will be moving on to other opportunities. So we just wanted to have something a bit different where we gather the whole team together to reflect a bit on the project and share some of our highlights from Layers of London. So we're going to each go through everyone you see on camera now. We're going to go through and do some mini presentations, and then at the end we'll have time for some questions and answers. So if you have any questions about anything we say today or anything about Layers of London in general, we'll be happy to take those at the end. And you'll just be able to put those in the chat box, which you can access using in the bar menu at the bottom of the screen. You won't need to use your cameras or your microphones today. And also just to let you know that we're going to be recording this and we'll put it on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you want to see again, or if you want to share it with a friend, you'll be able to. I think that's everything I have to say. So I'll pass over to our project director, Matthew, now, if you're ready.
Great, thank you very much, Liam, and welcome everybody. Good to have you all here. I'm going to try and share my screen now just to get things going. So let me know if that's working all right.
Not yet. Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Perfect. So when we agreed to talk about our favourite maps and collections, I thought it'd be quite easy, but of course it's been really, really difficult to try and select anything because they all mean different things to me as the sort of project director. But I have chosen as the map, William Morgan's map of 1682. And I've chosen it for several reasons. Firstly, because in a sense it's the prototype for the whole project, because about 10 years ago, we started to work on William Morgan's map with Museum of London Archaeology. And we geo-referenced it. We stitched the individual sheets together because it was obviously published in individual sheets back in the late 17th century. And then we geo-referenced it to fit onto a modern mapping framework. So that really sort of provided the methodology effectively for Layers of London as it is now. So it sort of feels very sort of personal for me in a sense. Just looking at this is some of the work that Mola did on the map. So we extracted all the information about streets, about parishes, and about places. And much of this information you can now see on Layers of London. What I also like about Morgan's map is that it sort of shows London's incredible development in the early modern period. And this is a previous map, a so-called Agus map, that shows how rural the area around Whitechapel was in the 16th century. And then you go through to the 1640s with Faithorne and Newcourt's map showing how things were starting to develop. And then onto Morgan's map, where the lane that's in blue, which used to be called Hog Lane, is now called Petticoat Lane, a much more familiar name to us today. And of course, these days it's actually called Middlesex Street, but Petticoat Lane Market is still very sort of well known. What I also like about Morgan's map is that it's got these little drawings of buildings, and it shows sort of some of the new buildings that were put up after the Great Fire, when particularly a lot of the livery company halls were destroyed by the fire. And so some of these match really quite nicely with some of the documentary evidence we've got about Grocers' Hall or Fishmongers' Hall, for example, Fishmongers being down by the river. In terms of the architectural descriptions that you get in some of the building accounts, for example. But the map isn't quite all it seems, because St Paul's Cathedral hadn't yet been finished when William Morgan's map was published. And so what the map maker did was to use, we think, a design that had been produced in around 1675, the so-called warrant design, which looks not much like the spire of the cathedral as it is today. So it's an example of an imagined landscape in London as opposed to the actual landscape. And we need to remember that London wasn't completely rebuilt by 1682. So that's William Morgan's map, and that's why I think it's, you know, I wanted to talk about it. Moving on to collections. Again, this was really, really hard because we've got so many wonderful collections on the website. I went in the end for the Hackney history collection because it's a really good example of how we've been able to collaborate with some amazing groups and archives right across London. And this is a particularly, you know, good example of a large collection of almost 300 records about Hackney, and it's incredibly diverse. It's got some amazing images, photographs from different parts of the borough, different kinds of things, buildings, people, and events, and it really sort of helps to bring the borough to life and tell lots of different kinds of stories. I'm going to just show three very sort of brief examples, again almost at random really, because there's such a richness there. The first one is Tyzax, which is a sort of a local tool makers that was in Old Street in the 1840s, and it sort of Tyzax worked with the local furniture makers, particularly sort of who worked in sort of some of the cheaper, poorer housing in the area. Eventually, they did go bankrupt, but it's a nice idea of the sort of the businesses where we have a sort of snapshot of activity in that part of London. But then jumping forward, we've got Broadway Market, and this is an interesting record because it talks about some of the controversial aspects of Hackney's history, about, you know, particularly gentrification, which of course it represents sort of the changing character of the borough, the people who live there, some of the traditions, customs, and so on. And that's not always been a straightforward or easy process for any part of London. And so this is a really interesting record that talks about that through the lens, if you like, of Broadway Market. And then to finish, I wanted to mention Dr. Tripe, who was quite an eminent medical figure in 19th century London, in fact, and he was the local medical officer of health in Hackney. And he was one of those really interesting figures who developed some interesting theories about the communication and development of disease in London. Some of his theories were slightly dubious, to say the least, but other theories actually were really quite on the money. And, you know, he did a lot of work to improve some of the sanitary conditions in poorer neighbourhoods in particular. So that was really all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll hand over to our next speaker.
Yep, that's you, Karina.
Yes, hi. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Here we go. Right, okay. Hang on, I need to just get rid of this at the bottom here. Right, hi, my name's Karina Flynn and I am the volunteer coordinator for Layers of London. I worked to develop the volunteer and engagement programme alongside Amy when the project, the website was first launched in 2018. I've been running workshops and projects across London to get people involved in the project and contributing to the website. So the layer I have chosen is the Camberwell Arts Project, which is a crowdsourced collection of places with meaning to people living in Camberwell. It was created on blackboards using coloured chalk, as you can see here. So why have I chosen this map? On a visual level, I love how colourful and interesting this map is. It highlights a fundamental concept that I've learned about map making, It is that maps always reflect a perception, whether that's due to the time period in which it was made, who it was commissioned by, and for what purpose. In relation to this point, I like that this map is representative of many different people's perceptions of what is most important in their communities. It also signifies an important aspect of layers, which is that it focuses on people's experiences of living in London, and that this is equally important when representing the history of the city. I also want to mention the juxtaposition of places of historical and cultural interest along with personal significance. I've selected some examples from this map just to demonstrate this. If you can see in this image here, someone's drawn a picture of the South London Gallery here. And then a place which no longer exists, which was of historical interest, it's Sultan Street, which someone's added was one of the worst slums in London. In contrast to this, something else which has been added, Mrs. Richards' shop. So I'm not quite sure what that shop sells, but it's obviously of importance to someone living in the area. I also love that it represents children's perspectives of what's important. You can see here that a child has drawn their local playground, which is lovely. You can see the swings here. This layer is representative of the reality of a lived environment, which I think provides a unique example on the website, and in concept is reflective of what Layers of London has aimed to achieve. So the collection that I have chosen is one of the curated collections by the London Metropolitan Archives, Housing London. It's a collection of photographs of housing developments built by the London County Council during its existence from the 1880s to the 1960s. I've chosen this because the content is so rich and provides a wonderful insight into the diversity of housing, but also the way that people were living. I've selected just 3 examples which highlight how different elements were considered in terms of better living conditions when designing these houses. So this first one here is of the Old Oak Estate in Hammersmith. These cottage estates were designed with a front and a back garden, and local garden societies were set up and prizes were given to the best kept gardens. You can see in this picture here that this garden's won first prize. This next image here is of a sculpture in the Maitland Park Estate in Camden. So the sculpture was by the artist Geoffrey Harris and was commissioned by the London County Council. And many sculptures were located in the housing estates and were based around themes of community and family. It was an important aspect of the broader vision that the public experience art and open space near their homes. So lastly, I've got this example of the Southampton Estate, and it shows an interior with open plan living areas, which were designed to be more modern, integrated and efficient. To me, this collection captures an exceptional period in history when housing really encompassed a much broader societal vision. And these photographs are a wonderful record of this. Finally, I just want to say it's been wonderful working on Layers of London with all my colleagues, and also with a platform which sees such a diverse range of histories come together in one place. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. I really like that last picture because I feel like you're just dropping in on a normal in this estate back in the 60s. Okay, so next up is Adam.
Okay, I'll just share my screen.
And I'll just turn my screen share off first.
Okay, I'm going to risk going onto the website live, albeit one layer that I prepared earlier. And the layer I've chosen is not a map. It's actually one of our data sets. And it's one I'm particularly fond of because my history and my background is in archaeology. And the layer I'd like to share today is London's Archaeological Investigations, which is a series of information that was provided by the London Archaeologist magazine. And each year they gather up the roundups of every excavation that's taken place within that year, and they publish it in their journal. And what we were able to do earlier on this year was to map the locations of all the investigations that have taken place from 1972, when the first excavation or professional investigations in London started, right up to 2017. And we've divided them into 3 different sections. And if I switch on this, you can see the map looks like it's suddenly got a plague of these red dots. And these are all the investigations from 1992, when commercial archaeology really started to take off, up to 2017. And what's fantastic about this is that it doesn't just focus on the City of London, it has all the outer boroughs and investigations all over Greater London too. And this is in addition to the City of London investigations, which crop up in purple in the middle here, in the City of London. And then we also have the green ones, if I zoom out a little bit, which cover the Greater London investigations from that early period of 72 to 91. Now what's fantastic is that if we zoom in on one particular street, and where should we go? Let's go to Poultry. We should, if I click on here, you get a fantastic summary of what the discoveries were on that investigation, including the periods, the company that excavated it, and the year of the excavation as well. So there is a phenomenal amount of information relating to this particular data set and layer. And what's really cool is if you go outside of London, somewhere here, you might get something quite random. I'll click on this one here in Stroud Green, and it might have things like this one, which is post-medieval 17th century buildings, or it might have something going right back to prehistory as well. So it's really interesting to see what's beneath the ground in your local area. To complement this, I'm also going to share a collection which is archaeology based as well. And I'll open this up. And this was a project I was particularly proud to be a part of, again with London Archaeologist magazine. I had a fantastic team of volunteers who systematically went through all the old articles, through all the old publications in London Archaeologist magazine, and started to map them on the base map here. So if I turn off the layer and show records, hopefully this will work. I'll just close the tray again. You can see the number of articles that have been mapped, numbering over 700 here, and again covering all aspects of Greater London, as well as a vast amount of articles relating to the city themselves. Now I know I haven't got too much time, so I'm not going to click on every single one here, but I might just point out a couple. And if we head over to somewhere like Stratford, I believe there is, oops, if I can find it, articles relating to the Olympic Park and the Olympic Games. This is one of my particular favourites, which I actually, egotistically, I mapped this one, but it's a really nice look of the first Olympic village, which was 3,000 years ago before. And as they were preparing for the Olympic Games in 2012, they found all this amazing archaeology. And then as I was mapping another article as part of this project, there was one that's just outside of London, but shows you what kind of things end up in the magazine. And this is one relating to Thorpe Park and the archaeological reconstructions that were that you can view and visit when Thorpe Park opened back in 1981. So a couple of fun little collections and records to share with you today. And that's the archaeology on Layers of London. That is supplemented by a huge amount of information from MOLA, Museum of London Archaeology, and also Historic England with their historic environment records. So if you're interested in the distant past, Layers of London is where it's at. And I think I'll stop sharing there.
Thanks, Adam. Over to you, Rebecca, now.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the administrator from Layers of London, and I've been with the project right from the very beginning. I am also going to share my screen because I'm also using the site live. Okay, the map I've chosen is quite zoomed out, so if you're not familiar with London generally, just to show that we're looking at Dagenham, which is right out west. Okay, this map is, it's not just, it's the bomb map of Dagenham. And it was drawn by the A.E. Strickland, who was the borough engineer after the war. And I think what's extraordinary about this map is that it shows not just where bombs fell, but the exact type of bombs. It's incredibly detailed. You can see where aircraft crashed. I think there's one. Oh, this is what happens when you use the site live. My bandwidth is letting me down a bit. But yeah, you can see an aeroplane came down here in Whalebone Lane. And I think why I really like this map is this incredible level of record keeping and the way it's been very beautifully drawn. And I think because of all the detail, you can really get a feel for how it must have been for people living in this area, listening out for different types of bombs that made very different sounds, all these patches that are incendiary, so fires. And of course with Dagenham, with the Ford Motorworks down by the river, they got hit even more because it was on the way out of a bombing run. Aeroplanes might be offloading their bombs and trying to hit important industrial sites like that. And the other reason why I chose this map is one of the first local borough maps that we saw right at the beginning of the project, when it was just myself and my colleague Saif, who you're going to hear from shortly. We were trying to, we already had all these wonderful maps that our partners like the British Library and MOLA and London Metropolitan Archives had given to us, but we wanted to persuade local boroughs to give us the treasures in their map, make them available to everyone. And we went out one rainy day, and it seemed a very long way from Senate House in Bloomsbury out to Barking. We went by tube and train and bus, so all of London transport's finest methods. And we were shown this map, which is about 6 feet long in person, and you could only see it by going to Valence House, which is where the Barking and Dagenham archives are. And so we were really excited. It was really good to see an example of how you could share this amazing history that's sitting in all our fantastic local archives, which, as we all know, are often understaffed and underfunded. And we're just really delighted that we could share these treasures with everybody. Anyone can now come and look on layers and find all these wonderful, wonderful maps. I'm just going to close that. I'm going to show you my favorite collection. I hope. Okay, very briefly, the collection I've chosen is Music Hall, Brixton and Beyond. What I love about this is the music halls are just a fantastic bit of London history, and well, all over the country, but they're just fascinating because they're often, the entertainment is for normal people. It's not at all highbrow. A lot of the performers are of a working class background, and they became enormously successful and enormously popular. And it's so there's just a few records in here I want to draw your attention to, but it's really worth having a look. Florrie Ford, look at her, she's a legend. Their song she made popular that people might still know, Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Old Kit Bag, down at the old Bull and Bush. But I just think this is a wonderful collection to show this lost slice of life in the city. And thank you, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so now it's my turn. I just need to get up my slideshow. Where am I? Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I'm Liam Cunningham, and since December 2018, I've been working on digital communications, running our social media and doing the mailing list for the project. I originally just did it 1 day a week because I had another job, but then when I had the opportunity to make it my full-time job, I packed the other one in, and it's been great working on Layers of London for the past 2 years. So I just wanted to share my favorite layer. So I actually wouldn't call this my favorite layer to look at or to explore, but it represents kind of a thing I really liked about working with the project, which was going around to all different parts of London that I'd never been to or sometimes even heard of before, and talking with people there and sharing the collection of material we have on the site, and just engaging with local history and stuff. So this map I became familiar with when we had a series of events out in Feltham in Hounslow, and we didn't have that many maps covering the area at the time, except for this one from 1636, which is one of our oldest original maps on the site. But I had just had a quick look at it before the event, and I thought, I can't really make anything out of this, which is because on the site it's geo-referenced, but it wasn't drawn with north at the top, so it comes up upside down. So it looks couldn't really make it out, and I didn't investigate too thoroughly until we had set up our stall out in Feltham Library, and we had the site up on a television monitor, which we precariously turned upside down to be able to look at the map a bit closer. And then all these kind of things, all the details on the map became clear, and with the site, we were able to zoom in and see all the different things that have been marked on the site by Moses Glover. And I think having this map from almost 400 years ago, people were so impressed to see that Feltham was marked on it. And I think I've seen this a lot whenever we showed maps to anyone, that everyone always wants to see where they live, and people are always really impressed to see that. They never thought that the roads that they walk on every day or the town they lived, even though they probably never thought about it. Obviously, it was probably there ages ago, but just to see that, oh wow, this person from so many hundred years ago was here and people were here. And I think it just really connects people to the past, which I think is one of the main goals of what we were trying to do at Layers of London, to get people to think about the local history around them, that history is everywhere, and not just about important people or about big events, but that the streets we walk on every day have these incredible stories. So it was great to be out in Feltham Library and just talk to local people who are really enthusiastic about their history, and to share with them what we had Layers of London. And I had that experience a lot of times when going around to different parts of London and meeting all kinds of people and showing them the site. So then my favorite collection is this Inventive Vents, which came about as part of a collaboration with an architectural education charity called Our Hut. They've done a few different projects about different parts of London, like Crystal Palace Park and the new Covent Garden Market. They've created educational resources and gone around to different parts of London and taught children and adults kind of about how to appreciate the built environment around them. So then their latest project was to map and do research on the ventilation shafts that are connected to the tube and electricity power stations and stop London from exploding, I suppose. But when I first heard that they wanted to do a project about ventilation shafts, I was skeptical because it doesn't sound very glamorous. But then once we organized an event together anyway and got some volunteers in, they did some training and got people to go out there and take pictures and do some research about these ventilation shafts. And they're actually a lot more interesting than I had first anticipated. Lots of them are dressed up and kind of disguised. So all of these that you can see here, this statue of Wellington, this can't remember what that's called in Paternoster Square, and that tickets booth in Leicester Square, they're all connected to ventilation shafts and letting out steam all the time. So now I think whenever I walk around London, I look at things and think, is that a ventilation shaft? And I think I'll probably do that till the day I die. So that's a true legacy of Layers of London in my personal life. So yeah, if you're interested in learning about ventilation shafts, which I recommend you do, check out the collection on Layers of London. And after me is Stephen.
Hi, yes, I'm here. I'm Stephen Gadd. I'm very much the new boy. I only joined the team in May. They've made me feel incredibly welcome, and I feel like a child in a sweet shop. It's such fun being part of this team. What I want to show you is the project I'm working on at the moment, which is to produce a geo-referenced composite map of Richard Bloom's ward maps, which he surveyed in 1694. They were updated and extended by John Tripe from 1707 in order to illustrate his updated edition of John Stow's 1598 textual survey. The illustrations included those of the Custom House, St James's House and St Bartholomew's Hospital, and also those of the Guildhall, St Paul's Cathedral, and my favourite, 8 of the city's gates. Now, I've uploaded all 33 images to a collection on the Layers website where tags indicate the location of each landmark. So I've done a slightly different thing. I've combined my collection and map choice so that they've both come from Stripe's 1720 publication. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I create the composite map. The first step with each individual map is to remove the index and trim the borders, and then adjust the colors. And then georeferencing is achieved by matching points on the original map with points on that can be identified on 19th century Ordnance Survey maps. You can just about perhaps make out the red dots that correspond between the original and the OS maps there. The GIS software that I then use stretches the image as though it were printed on a rubber sheet, so that all of the corresponding points conform with those on the more modern maps. What really takes the time, though, is iteratively improving the georeferencing by adding more points and then choosing where to refine the trimming so that the overlapping maps will join as seamlessly as possible. And it'll never be quite perfect. You can see here where the joins, where different maps of different scale and style meet. Aberrations include in the mapping a double appearance of St Michael's Royal Church on Great Elbow Lane, which is now College Street. And the year of Stripe's publication, 1720, was of course the Annus Horribilis of the South Sea Company based at South Sea House. You can see that the shading on Bloom's original plate has been packed with this new text. This is how the house looked a few years later. And although it's generally thought that Stripe simply published in 1720 the maps that he'd edited for the aborted publication in 1708, this shows that he updated at least this map after the South Sea Company's foundation in 1711. The last step is to go back to the keys, which were trimmed off the maps in order to make them fit together, and in this case including, in the days before public conveniences, 2 pissing alleys at 7 and 11. Each numbered location now has a label corresponding to the numbering, and we can overlay these labels on a modern map and see that urinal number 11 no longer leads to the side of Lyons Inn, but instead to the front door of the Britain-Australia Society. So that's it. The process map and key layers are uploaded to the website. And for the full Layers of London experience, you can try loading up the Stripe record set together with the Bloom and Stripe layer set. Aldersgate, you can see roughly on the map, pops up in greater detail in the collection. And you can also see how much wider the Thames used to be. That's just south of Temple. And so far, I've managed to stitch together this much of the total coverage. I have these maps ready and waiting, but haven't yet managed to locate adequately high-resolution scans to extend the coverage this far. So if any of you got any ideas, please shout. That's it from me.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for the behind-the-scenes look at the georeferencing process. So now we actually have a pre-recorded message from our old public engagement officer, Amy, who worked with the project for about 2 years and was very instrumental in getting it all started. But like a celebrity at an awards show, she couldn't make it here tonight, but sent us a message anyway. I also forgot to tell her that there was a time limit, so I might have to cut her off at some point. But in the version we put up on YouTube, we'll include the full message.
Hi everyone, I'm really sorry that I can't make it today. I've double booked myself in with webinars, but I'm kind of sad to hear that this phase of Layers of London is coming to an end. It was such an important job for me. I learned so many skills on it. Being a public engagement officer is something that I'd done before, but I'd never done it in an academic environment and on such a huge scale. So we got to work with amazing colleagues at the Institute of Historical Research who were doing all sorts of like wonderful things and had lots of experience. And got a lot of insight into some of the histories and maps and what the applications of a project like Layers of London could be. And then, you know, a public engagement project across the whole of London that has successfully engaged, you know, community groups and stories and people in every single London borough, which is just amazing over such a short space of time. And I was on the project for about 2 years. And I think for me, one of the most amazing parts of the project was traveling around London. So I've lived in London now for 10 years, at that point, maybe 7, 8 years. And I'd been to so many, I thought I'd been to so many places in London, but there was places all over London that I'd never been to, and places where some of those people don't associate themselves as being Londoners, you know, parts of East London where they'd say that they were more Essex, or South where they'd more be Surrey, and that was really interesting. And the diversity of the groups that we worked with on various different projects, meeting different people and their experiences of London, I think for me was the great thing about it. And there was a lot of, you know, it's an online project, so it's one of the most amazing legacies about the project is that anyone will still be able to use it and contribute to it. But for me, being in public engagement, one of the nicest things was showing people how to use the website, getting people to add their own stories onto the website, and then, you know, starting work one day and having a look what's on the website and then seeing all these new amazing collections start. And obviously that took time, but what an amazing resource it is. So I'm just going to show you my favourite collection, which is a little bit biased because it's one that I worked on with a couple of students. And so Josephine and Kavisha, I put a call out asking for volunteer help to create some collections based on women's history. And Kavisha and Josephine got in touch, and we worked on this project together, which was inspired by some of the work that Hannah Elias, who used to be the communications officer for the Institute of Historical Research, had worked on. She did a social media campaign which was called #RememberHer, and asked people to talk about women that had been kind of lost by history. And so inspired by that, the three of us worked on this project to create a #RememberHer collection on Layers of London. So if you go onto the collections, it's really easy to find, or you can search for Remember Her. And this is what the collection throws up. So there's 30 records here, you can see. So here's the collection and here's 30 records. They're all mapped, and the collection is really great because it's a mixture between people that are already commemorated, so women that are already commemorated in London. Maybe they have a statue, maybe they have a plaque, but then also the other side of the collection is women that are not yet remembered in a kind of permanent way with a statue or a plaque or something like this, and they were suggestions of people that should be. And these were suggestions that were given to us via social media. So Kavisha and Josephine worked on collating this and doing research of women that were already commemorated, and then separately worked on a social media campaign asking members of the public for who aren't commemorated that should be. So it was quite a big project, really, that they did over a summer while they had some break from their studying. And we're so grateful. The volunteer contribution to Layers of London, which is kind of integral, the whole point is that it's this kind of community project, is the reason why it's such a successful and interesting resource. So if I just pick out 3 of the records that I really like, just show the kind of breadth of this collection. This one is Remember Her, Jayabin Desai. Jayabin Desai was the kind of leader of the Grunwick strike in the 1970s. And this is kind of a part of history that I really like, which is why I'm drawn to it. And you know, learning about striking South Asian working class women in the 1970s is a story that we don't know much about. And the reason why Layers of London is fantastic is because you realise these kind of stories are not really rare. You know, things like this happened all the time. We just don't get told about it. And that's kind of going to shift our perspective for now and for the future and how we think about things. So this is a great one. If you don't know anything about Jayabin Desai or the Grunwick strike, it's definitely worth a read. She decided that the employment that she had at the time, they were asking her to do extra shifts. They didn't give her any notice on these kind of things, and she decided enough is enough, and she got this strike organised, and then the TUC got involved and things like that. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful in the way that they were asking it to be successful, but it really paved the way for a lot of these kind of small scale strikes. It had a huge national impact. I picked this one, which is Remember Her, Diane Abbott. So this is a really good example of one that was a user suggested, and there is no memorial. You know, thankfully Diane Abbott is still around, so we don't have to think about, you know, forgetting her anytime soon. But you know, Diane Abbott, what an amazing woman to have as a suggestion. I think that the statistics last year were, out of all the female MPs that were abused online and in person, I think Diane Abbott got over half, maybe more towards 3/4 of that personally. And you know, what an amazing person to have as someone who kind of stands in the face of adversity, one of the first female well, the first female Black MP and one of the first Black MPs anyway, who's been also an amazing MP for the Stoke Newington area, which is where I work now. And Diane Abbott is very supportive of the work that I do at Newington Green Meeting House on the project that I work on. But yeah, surely someone to look up to, whatever your political views, really, just in terms of bravery and sticking something out. And, you know, the Parliament isn't somewhere that was built for someone like Diane Abbott to succeed in. And I think that she does a fantastic job. So definitely one for the future. So that was quite nice. And then I have to highlight, where's she gone? Mary Wollstonecraft, and this is partly because I work on a project now which is very much devoted to sharing the history of Mary Wollstonecraft. So if no one's ever been to Newington Green Meeting House, please do come. It's in top end of Newington Green, and we're open for tours now. You can book on a Tuesday and Thursday, and it's free, and myself or a lovely volunteer will take you round, and hopefully soon we'll be open to the public for drop-in visits too. So Mary Wollstonecraft is going to have a statue soon on Newington Green, which is a campaign over the past 10 years to get a statue to Mary through the Mary on the Green campaign, which we work with. It's the Wollstonecraft Society now, and they do amazing work to share Mary's history and story for the future. So, you know, Mary Wollstonecraft, I have to kind of mention here because she's kind of the mother of British feminism as well. So, you know, a huge impact on feminism today, and was really kind of picked up again in the 1970s for second wave feminism, and, you know, is completely influential when we think about the gender pay gap, when we think of women working. You know, she was one of the first kind of female published writers that wrote as a job. She was a travel writer. As a single mum, she strapped her baby on her back and she travelled around Denmark and Scandinavia. She was a huge influence on the Romantics and the Romantic period. And her legacy is just one, I think, you know, that we need to remember today, of a strong independent woman who had radical views and radical thoughts and was happy to share them. And society at the time wasn't particularly accepting of that, but she did it anyway. And I think that that's a really good thing to kind of hold on to, especially in difficult times at the moment with the pandemic, politics and things like that. So I hope you enjoyed that collection. Please do check it out. There's loads of great ones on there. I think there's loads of great women's history on Layers of London, so it's a great resource. Thanks.
Okay, I'll need to stop Amy there because we have we're on a schedule here, but I will include the full video that she sent over in the YouTube recording that will go up at some point tomorrow. And so for our final presentation, I'll pass over to our project manager, Saif.
Thank you, Liam. Hello, everyone. I've really enjoyed working on this project for the past 4 years, and it's been really exciting to discover various layers as the project has acquired them. And I think as an architectural historian, the one that struck me most is the London County Council bomb damage map, which belongs to the London Metropolitan Archives. I'm sure most of you are familiar with images of the City of London after the Blitz almost entirely destroyed. And this fragment of the map shows the dark purple, which is the area around St. Paul's Cathedral. Generally, the map is an amazing endeavor that documents the condition of buildings in London after the Blitz, and it categorizes them going from black, which is the worst condition, to light green and yellow, which are a whole range of categories of what conditions buildings were in. And it also shows where V1 and V2 rockets fell. For someone like me who wanders around thinking about buildings and why streets look the way they do, one of the things I found is that actually this map often gives me answers to why there are anomalies in London, why I walk along the street and find that there's a row of Victorian terraces and then two houses look different and are from the 60s. And more often than not, the reason is that a bomb fell. This is, what you see here is the area of Clapham, where you can see that there's sporadic areas of bomb damage, which is very common across London. I would say that the city, apart in other places where there was extensive damage, some areas you just find a bomb here or there. And I was struck by where one of the V1 or V2 rockets fell, and looked on the satellite image and found that actually it's mainly a 19th century area, and then you find new buildings are built where there was significant bomb damage. When I first moved to London to work on this project, I used to live in Canada Water, which I naively thought was an area with no history because it looked so new. And everything was rectilinear. And when I looked closely, once layers had started at the bomb damage map, I realized that actually Canada Water, like every other area of London, had great history, but it had been extensively damaged and destroyed in the war. And that led to successive waves of urban development. And one of the things I found actually is that areas that were reconstructed after the war tend to go through waves of reconstruction and again, because people have less sympathy for post-war buildings in general. So these are buildings built in the 2000s, but if you look in the background, there's a post-war building that was spared the reconstruction of the 2000s. And this is, when I looked at the London bomb damage map, this is what I found, that actually this was an industrial area and was very heavily destroyed. And it's something that struck me as we went to other places in London, like Dagenham, which Rebecca showed, that today many of these places are quiet residential areas. Historically, they were commercially very vibrant and very important, and therefore were the target of German bombs. So sometimes the urban fabric and the buildings of London today hide a very different past. This is Canada Water today. And I think the most striking example was once when I visited a friend in Gypsy Hill, very, very far in South London, where there isn't much evidence of bomb damage. And I was looking for his house and was struck by the fact that there were rows and rows and rows of Victorian terraces, and there was an anomaly, which was this housing estate that looked very modern. And I wondered what had led someone to build this very modernist housing estate in an area that was otherwise from the late 19th century. And I didn't really think that it was bomb damage, but when I went home, I thought, oh, let me just check. And I found that actually a rocket had fallen on that very spot, and that explained why there was this very striking contrast between one little area of Gypsy Hill and the whole neighborhood. So for me, the bomb damage map is a really interesting and entertaining way of understanding London and why it looks the way it does today. And like Rebecca, I'm always struck by the fact that in most places when there's a war, people run away, and whereas after the Blitz, people documented everything. And I think it's a remarkable endeavor to think that the level of detail that went into producing a map like this one. My favorite collection is one about Greek and Greek Cypriot gastronomy in London, partially because we've been able to sample the results of this collection of Greek and Cypriot restaurants, but partially because one of the things that struck me about it, these are short videos with restaurant owners, and many of our records are text-based. But what I found with videos and audio is that when you get people to talk, they often are more free in what they talk about. And so they tell you casually things about their family history, about what they think. And in this case, one of the things that comes across, I'm not going to show you the video, but please feel free to look at it, is that when you take something like a Greek restaurant or Cypriot restaurant, it reflects a whole world. So for the most part, Cypriots came here because they were escaping from political turmoil in Cyprus. Secondly, you find that many Greek restaurants were set up in Camden, which was a very Greek area at the time. It's no longer predominantly Greek or Greek Cypriot. And one of the things that comes across is that historically, many of these restaurants cater to the Greek and Greek Cypriot community, but today, as people travel, more and more of their clientele are not ethnically Greek, but they've experienced and tasted Greek and Cypriot food and come and want to eat it when they get home, and it reminds them of their holiday. So actually, in this kind of collection, you discover a lot about the history of London, a lot about the people of London, and a lot about the way institutions might be the same, but things around them change. The other thing I loved about it is that this was a project that was really produced by one person, Clary Bakura, who got funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, did these amazing videos. And so I think it captures what Les is about, because on one hand, we have very large, well-established national partners, but on the other hand, we also have individuals who have contributed very meaningfully to an understanding of London and its rich and diverse history. And to end, one of our colleagues, actually, Olwen Myhill, said she was not into public speaking and she wasn't going to she wasn't going to participate in the webinar, but I know that if I don't end by thanking the National Lottery Heritage Fund, she's going to, it's going to be the first thing she's going to tell me. So I just want to say once again that a project like this wouldn't have been possible without the financial support of the Heritage Fund and other partners like the IHR Trust and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. So Olwen, I hope you approve, even though you wouldn't talk on camera. Thank you.
Thank you, Saif, and thank you everyone for sharing. I think this demonstrates just how much there is on the website, and we all have our different areas of interest, but we all find different bits of the site fascinating. And I'm sure if we had everyone else in the audience speaking, they'd all have different things that they wanted to point out too. So I just wanted to open open it up for questions from anyone from the audience who wants to ask us anything about what we've said today or about the project in general. You can just type them in the chat box, or any comments, concerns, questions. Paul asks, what's the future of the project? So maybe Matthew, you want to?
Yes, very happy to say something about that. Yeah, I mean, as you've heard earlier, this is the end of a particular phase in the project. The sort of the main funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and all projects like this do have ends to their funding, unfortunately. But Layers of London is continuing. The IHR is going to continue to support Layers of London and host it through our web developers. So it's not going away. It'll still be possible to add records. There may be further collections coming through as well. But we're also talking to both our web developers and other partners about other potential collaborations in the future, which could include funding, but also migrating to different platforms and various other things as well. I think we're all committed to sustaining Layers of London, because and for me personally, it's been such a sort of pleasure to work on it and to work with so many amazing colleagues. And it's just such a great resource. So I think it does have an exciting future. What we may be doing, for example, is also working with particular projects. So if there's an HLF kind of project working in a particular part of London that could use our website, then we'd be very pleased to sort of partner up. So there may be a number of projects like that we work with in the future. But Layers is not going anywhere. We're going to be continuing to do what we do.
Thank you. We have a question from Phil. Do you know how many layers there are now? Stephen, do you know that?
Lots.
I know that there are 406 map layers. I don't know about the record collections though.
I think
in terms of records, I think we're now up to about just over 9,000 individual records as well. So
I think when we started, we never imagined there would be so many actual layers on the website. We had, I remember, about a dozen sort of core layers that we described in our application to the funder. So it's extraordinary what's happened since, really, both particularly through the work with the boroughs in particular, where we've got these amazing local maps. And all these other people have come forward with wonderful maps of different kinds. And then recently, we've been able to secure lots and lots of maps from the British Library. We've got an amazing collection of London maps, which they geo-referenced in a project a few years ago. So we're going to be putting all of those up. And that's almost doubling the number of maps we've got. So it's just extraordinary, really.
Camilla asks, how has public participation in the project changed since COVID? And I think, just from my perspective, like having these webinars, it was always something that we kind of thought about doing, but hadn't got around to until we were forced to. But I think it's been a great success, and we've been actually able to do way more events with way more variety of speakers on different topics, and reach people who wouldn't have been able to come to our in-person events in London, people around the country and around the world as well. So I think that's been a really a silver lining of the whole thing for us. And I don't know if Adam or Karina, you want to say anything about that as well?
Yeah, I think it's given us an opportunity to have a look at how we can do online engagement. And I'm really pleased at some of the projects that we've been able to do with volunteers whilst under lockdown. One in particular, and Karina might want to say a bit more about this, but one has been our book club, where members of the public and volunteers have been reading novels and then mapping the locations that are mentioned in those novels. Karina, I don't know, would you like to say a bit more about that project?
Yeah, so I came back from maternity leave right in the middle of lockdown. So I had an interesting introduction to all the online engagement stuff. But I have been running an online book club, which has just been amazing, really. It was such a wonderful project to sort of come back to. And it's so we've had about 25 participants, and they've all read different titles and then mapped locations that they found significant in the books onto the website. So if you're interested in looking at those, then if you go onto the website and look for a range of titles, but yeah, so there's a range of titles which are under the tags London Fiction. But I also just want to add as well that I think it's really broadened our level of engagement, because when I first worked on the project, we did a lot of in-person engagement, and as Liam said, that it's engaged a whole new audience. So actually it's really helped to broaden the audiences that have engaged with the project.
Matthew, do you have to dash? No? Okay, good. So somebody asked, if you did the project again, what would you do differently, if anything? Maybe Saif and Rebecca, who've been here since the beginning, might have anything to say about that.
Okay, Rebecca, do you want to start or shall I? Okay.
I'll just say, I think I'd have maybe be even more ambitious and just have more faith in what we could achieve, because from our initial, right at the beginning of the project, I don't think we ever imagined that we would have the number of layers that we've had, or the reach we've had, or yeah, done as much as we've been able to do. So yeah, my takeaway is, yes, have faith in it. It's an amazing project, and it will continue to be, and I hope it will continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just come in on that, I think I absolutely agree. I think the difficulty always is when you're doing something that's completely new, you have no idea, A, if the funder's going to like it, and B, if the people out there are going to like it. So with hindsight, I think there are a number of things we might have done differently, both in terms of being bolder and, you know, recognizing the huge demand for this. And I think certainly the scale of the project is such that there are a number of things, particularly around the website and so on, that we might have done differently if we'd known that it was going to be like this. But you know, it's always difficult to sort of, you can't use hindsight in that way, I suppose. There was one question about a Layers of Liverpool thing on the chat just now. So just briefly to say that one of the great things about Layers is that it's led to the development of a sort of product by our developers, which they're using already with a project in Coventry and also a project in Islington. And the Coventry project is going to be something that looks a bit like Layers. In fact, it's for the Coventry City of Culture next year. So essentially all it takes really is a local partnership between a developer with the technology that's been developed and archives, museums and groups in a particular part of the country. And so it's that combination that we had right across London with our institutional partners, that if you can replicate that in another city, then that will be great.
Okay, well, like, I would say that for the most part, I would do the project in the same way, which, I mean, in that we listened a lot and we learned a lot and we explored a lot. And I think that was a very good thing about it, is that we started off with a general aim, but weren't exactly sure how to bring all the different bits together, and we learned from the experience. I would say that, I mean, just today, for example, someone wrote to us saying that there were aeronautical maps and whether we'd like to include them on the website. So I think that one thing that perhaps if we had more time with this phase, I mean, it's always the hard thing, that just not as soon as things, but things come together more and more and more, and it snowballs. And so the longer you have to reap the benefits of public interest and public appreciation, and the better, I would say. And I think that upon reflection, one of the remarkable things about this project is that when we gave presentations at the beginning, and I'm sure Karina will agree, there was much more apprehension and many more question marks about, oh, how's it going to work? What about copyright? What about accuracy of information? And as we've gone on, the project has proven that it's been, that was a really good idea. And I think irrespective of COVID, which has emphasized the value of layers more. It was a pioneering thing, and it's been interesting and rewarding to see that most people appreciate it now. And 4 or 5 years ago, people thought it was a good idea, but they often weren't sure how it was going to work, and whether they wanted to be one of the first groups to jump in and put time and invest time and resources into it.
Okay, I think it's now 5 o'clock. So if anyone has any last things they want to add. Nope. But thank you for all the nice comments in the chat, and thank you all for attending the webinar today. And you can stay in touch. Someone asked how you can stay in touch. We'll still be on our social media, which is on Twitter, Layers of London, Facebook, Layers of London, and also you can email layersoflondon@london.ac.uk. The contact information will all be on our website. And this is recorded, so it'll be up on our YouTube tomorrow. And you can also see there all the past webinars that we've been doing over the past few months. So thanks everybody, thanks team for participating, and thanks everyone for coming. And have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a picture of you. There you go. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Liam, for facilitating. See you soon.